This is Analytics with Asa, episode 3, hosted on the FF Faceoff YouTube channel. So it's kind of been some time since I've been with you guys, but I wanted to kind of spend some time to talk about what I think is going to happen in the draft, combined with my personal rankings, and cover our favorite time of year, which is mock draft season. It's kind of the time where players can actually be positive and teams can kind of have some hope before they lose their first games and things kind of end up going the wrong way. But without further ado, let's kind of get things started with the Tennessee Titans. So I think in this draft, there's kind of a big debate between quarterback, who is obviously the most valuable position in the NFL, or do I pick a blue chip player? And so the debate to me is really between Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, or Cam Ward, who I think is going to be the quarterback one in this year's draft. I think when you're balancing all of that, probably the safest pick is going to be Abdul Carter, just someone who dominated at the edge with Penn State all season. But I think if you're really shooting for ceiling, it makes sense to go Cam Ward at 1. So I think that's what we're going to do here. I think the Browns are also in an interesting situation because they are the team that has this whole Deshaun Watson drama going on, and we kind of have to see how that gets sorted out before we really feel comfortable making this pick. But you know, it's a little boring to just say, let's wait and see. I think realistically, what's going to happen is the Browns end up getting some sort of veteran quarterback, likely Kirk Cousins, someone who has a pairing with Kevin Stefanski next season. And I know the Falcons have kind of illustrated that they don't plan on releasing him right now, but Kirk is kind of a competitive guy. I would not be surprised if he ends up being someone who wants to start again. And so whenever you have your quarterback kind of solved, I think the safe pick would be either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, guys who kind of both represent team needs. And so I think I feel comfortable taking Travis Hunter here, someone who could fulfill, some spots at the receiver position, and someone who is what most draft analysts say is their cornerback 1. And so I feel pretty comfortable taking Travis Hunter here. I think the next pick, we have the New York Giants. And so the Giants are also in an interesting situation because they desperately need a quarterback, and they need a quarterback now. And so there's been kind of some rumors floating around about Matthew Stafford being that type of guy who could kind of solve your problems right away. I think the issue with Stafford is that he's going to cost probably $50 million a year, which is a lot of money to give up for someone who's kind of in their later 30s. And he's someone who's going to require draft capital to get there. A friend of mine, Sam Brookhouse, has a cool analysis on that as well on Twitter. But I think given all of that, Shedeur Sanders is going to be the pick here. He's someone who may not be pro ready right away. I mean, he's relatively accurate with his time at Colorado, but not an incredible athlete. But it seems like he has a really good rapport with the coaching staff there. And that's going to be an important part of the draft. And, he didn't throw at the combine, which is a bit of a bummer because we really wanted to see him throw. But I think that's illustrative of the confidence he has getting taken really early. And so, yeah, Shedeur going at 3 would not be surprising at all. And then I think with the Patriots here, I think it's a pretty easy pick. Abdul Carter at edge. He's arguably the best player in the entire draft. And he is probably the second or third most important position in the entire draft. And so him getting taken at 4 is a pretty easy pick for me here. He's someone who had a little bit of that foot concern, but doctors have said it doesn't really require surgery. So I'm not too worried about that, but you're going to have team control over him for 5 years, which is more than enough time to kind of see if he's cut out for that top 5 selection, which most people are mocking him at. At number 5, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have really good edge rushers. And I think the dream scenario here is what has happened, which is Mason Graham falling to them at the 5 position. Mason Graham is a really good 3 technique who is a great run defender. He was really good at using power to defend the run, but kind of finesse to rush the passer, which is a really interesting combo. But pairing Trayvon Walker, Mason Graham, and then Josh Hines-Allen is going to be a really fun combo for that team who kind of has some need at defensive tackle. The Raiders here, they have quite a few needs. It's kind of a bummer that Abdul Carter did not fall to them, but I think losing Devontae Adams via trade last season really opens up that wide receiver spot. So Ted McMillan is definitely on the board. I would not be super surprised if Genty gets taken this early because he's a really good running back and the Raiders kind of realized, hey, whenever we miss out on Josh Jacobs, and he signed to the Packers in free agency last season, and you have Alexander Madison as your running back one, you're not really in the best scenario running back wise. And so Genty would not be a terrible choice, but I think I'm going to take the more valuable position, and that's going to be Ted McMillan, someone who's 6'5", close to 200 pounds, and he was one of the most open receivers. He's just an incredible route runner. And despite that, he's still someone who is really good at 50-50 balls, which is what you want when you're that tall. But he's really the type of complete receiver who can be a wide receiver one. He's giant. He's a good route runner. He's pretty fast. He's great at catching the ball. It's really the complete package you would want at wide receiver. So I would not be surprised to see them take Ted McMillan at 6. At number 7, we have the Jets. And the Jets are in another interesting spot here because they obviously have a giant question mark at quarterback, but they can't take a quarterback this early because Jackson Dart, I guess, is the next quarterback available. But my guess is he goes maybe tail end of the first, probably second, third round. There's a big tier gap between the first 2 quarterbacks and then him. But they also have needs at defensive interior to kind of pair with Quinnen Williams. And so I would not be surprised to see them take one of these athletic freaks like the other Michigan defensive tackle, Kenneth Grant. Will Johnson is on the board if they end up losing their cornerback. But I think given all that, I think Jahdae Barron's going to be the pick here. He's someone who's really versatile, who can play safety, who can play cornerback, and is really good at both of those spots. And so if you end up losing either of your cornerbacks in free agency, either this season, next season, the season after that, Jahdae Barron can either play safety now and then end up kind of submitting himself in that cornerback position later. But he's arguably the best defensive back in the draft, not named Travis Hunter. And so that would be a pretty easy pick here. And then the Panthers have quite a few needs as well. Obviously, their defense is a big question mark, but I would not be mad to pair someone like Luther Burden with Bryce Young. I think kind of thinking about it, Mike Green's going to be my pick here. He's someone who just really dominated the Senior Bowl, and that's something a lot of teams place a lot of stock in. If you can do really well against NFL caliber talent, then that's going to be important. And if you can just be comfortable rushing in positions you're not used to, which is what Mike Green did. And then obviously there's the clip on Twitter that really went viral, and it's just Mike Green completely dominating. I believe it was Josh Connerly, but yeah, really talented player. Someone who kind of dominated in the Senior Bowl, left right away, and is not really asking any questions after that. Next, we have the Saints, and the Saints are kind of in their typical spot where they're picking in the, early single or the late single digits, early teens, and have almost no cap space to speak of. And hopefully they're kind of in the midst of their rebuild at this point, but they have really needs at receiver with Rashid Shaheed being hurt, with Chris Olave having the concussion concerns. And so I think I'm going to take Luther Burden here. Luther Burden, someone who is really good after the catch, which is going to be an important component of that Kellen Moore offense, because he's someone who's really good at designing an offense. And I think getting someone like Luther Burden is going to be really important, and pairing him with the deep threat that Rashid Shaheed has, assuming he comes back healthy, I think would be a really fun combo. Next up, we have the Bears, and this is where Ashton Genty could really go, because Ben Johnson has kind of seen what it's like to have really good running back talent. And you had Jahmyr Gibbs, you had David Montgomery, and Ashton Genty in a way is kind of the bell cow back who could kind of cover both of those roles. That being said, they still really have a need at pretty much all of the offensive line. And so Will Campbell could certainly be in play here. I think I'm going to go Genty. I think Genty's going to be a fun pick because he's someone who's really, really talented. You don't really have a great running back free agency class. Aaron Jones may be the best running back in that class, which is not really a great indicator of its quality. But I think Genty is just the best running back in the best running back class that we've had in some time. And so picking him at 10, I think would be a great pick for the Bears, even if they have other needs as well. So at 11, we have the San Francisco 49ers. And to me, this is a very easy pick, and it's going to be Will Johnson. So Robert Saleh is someone who really likes to run that cover 3, cover 4 coverage scenario, which is where your receiver or your cornerbacks tend to play a little bit off, which is good if you have someone who's not lightning fast. Like Will Johnson is not super, super fast for his position. He's someone who did not end up deciding to run the 40, which hopefully he ends up running it on his pro day because it is a bit of a concern for some teams. But despite all that, he has great ball skills. He's really, really smart, which is something that's important to do when you're on the solid defense. And so I think, yeah, the Niners picking Will Johnson is a pretty easy pick there. Next up, we have the Cowboys. And the Cowboys really need a tackle. They kind of need a guard now with Zach Martin retiring. They need an edge rusher. I think given all of that, I'm going to take what I think is the best player available, and that's going to be James Pierce Jr. I think they have a lot of holes, but what's really important is having a good pass rush, which is good at covering up the stink that may be a lack of great defensive backs, which, you know, they have had injuries. They've had just players kind of age out. And so James Pierce Jr. is probably the best speed rusher in the NFL draft so far. He's someone who ran a sub 4.5 40 time, which is really good as an edge rusher. He's a little bit lighter at his position, being in like the 240 range, which isn't exactly ideal for run defense, but he's someone who's just a great pass rusher, and every team needs good pass rushers. So the Cowboys picking him at 12, I think, would be fine. I think this makes the pick really easy for the Dolphins, and that's going to be Will Campbell. The reason why is because Campbell is a really good tackle, but probably an even better guard. And the Dolphins last year just had a terrible offensive line. A lot of it has led to kind of some inefficiencies with Devon Achane. And Devon Achane was a great running back last season and the season before that, whenever he was in his rookie year. But whenever you have such an inefficient running game, I think that says more about the defensive line just dominating the offense more than it says about Devon Achane somehow regressing. And so I think Will Campbell would be the perfect plug-and-play guy who we can trust to make that offensive line much better. This is kind of a boring pick because everyone is mocking Tyler Warren to the Colts, but I feel like it's just so easy. Tyler Warren is one of the best tight end prospects we've seen in recent memory, maybe since the tight end for the Falcons, who kind of hasn't worked out that well. But Tyler Warren is a really good red zone threat, which is something that's important for the Colts to improve on because last year their red zone situation just wasn't good aside from Anthony Richardson using his athleticism. And Tyler Warren is 6'6", which is a giant target that Anthony Richardson can hopefully hit. But I would be very surprised if he ends up making it that far and they don't end up selecting him at the 14th spot. Next up, we have the Falcons. And the Falcons, they really need to improve their pass rush. And I think probably the best guy to do that is going to be Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan is someone who's just been an athletic freak as long as he's been in the NCAA. He played for Ole Miss last season and was relatively productive. But I think the big reason why teams want him is more for his traits. 6'3", 305 is kind of a big guy. His pass rush win rate, which is a little difficult to say, is not the highest, not something you specifically are looking for as a strength for him. But what's really important is just to show that he has the athletic traits to develop as a pass rusher, which is what teams want. Teams tend to kind of draft players for their pass rushing more so than the sack numbers or the pressure numbers, because those can kind of change whenever you enter the league. Up next, we have the Cardinals. And I think the Cardinals have quite a few needs here. Offensive line, certainly not great. And defensive line is also not great as well. So I think the real debate here is between Josh Simmons and Kenneth Grant. Kenneth Grant is just, I've said this a lot, but he's an athletic freak. He's about 330. He's about 6'3", and he's arguably the best pure nose tackle in the draft, which says a lot given how talented this nose tackle and 3-tech position is going into the season. But I think you're going to take Josh Simmons here. I think the biggest reason why is because Kyler Murray is someone who can scramble, but you really need time for your receivers to develop their routes. And if you're not given that time, it just leads to a lot of disrupted plays. And that's part of the reason why, we didn't have the most productive wide receiver seasons that we were hoping for, for their receivers. But whenever you have a really good tight end, that's important for a red zone offense. And Josh Simmons, I think, can improve both your run game and the pass game. Next up, we have the Bengals. And the Bengals I don't really think they have a need at receiver. I'm not sure what PFF is really saying here. My guess is if things don't really work out contract-wise, then my guess is they end up tagging T. Higgins because, he's going to probably command more in free agency. And so you have the power to franchise tag him, hopefully work out a deal next season. But Joe Burrow's been all over overthecap.com throughout the offseason and is showing how you can restructure his contract to kind of fit in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And that offense is going to be really good as long as they have that pairing there. But their defense was just a complete mess last season. I think I'm going to go Kenneth Grant. He's someone who I think can kind of shore up that defensive line. And he's also an elite run defender who has some pass rush traits that hopefully the team can kind of capitalize on. But he's someone that can really fill up a need that they have at defensive tackle. And so, yeah, I think the Bengals would really be well suited to have Kenneth Grant as their draft pick there. Next up, we have the Seahawks. And I think this is a pretty easy pick here. It's going to be Jahad Campbell. Their linebacker situation was not great last season. They picked Byron Murphy last year, who was a really good defensive tackle out of Texas. And he had a pretty productive season, not quite as good as his teammate Tavondre Sweat, but was still pretty good. And you have a need at linebacker. And I think Jahad Campbell is a really good player to fill that need. He's really good against the run. He's solid against the pass. And that's really all you can ask for a linebacker. But I think as long as you have that kind of Swiss Army knife that I know the coaching staff is going to want to have there, I think that's going to be a great pick for the Seahawks. Next up, we have the Buccaneers. And I think the Buccaneers have a few needs. Edge, linebacker, defensive back are going to be big. Their receivers are really good, but are starting to age a little bit. So that could be a potential position that they take here. I think they trust Jalen McMillan quite a bit, but I think I'm going to go Malachi Starks. He's probably going to be the best player available at this position, and he really helps out that defensive back room, which just is not great right now. And so I think that shores up the defense that wasn't great last season, which is kind of unexpected for the Buccaneers, who have kind of had a historically great defense the past few years. But Malachi Starks is going to be my pick there. Next up, we have the Broncos. And the Broncos are in an interesting spot because Sean McVay has always wanted someone that he can, or sorry, Sean Payton is someone who has always wanted the type of guy that he can just deploy as his joker, someone who he can use for mismatch situations. And I think the guy that may be perfect for that is going to be Colston Loveland. He's a really good tight end out of Michigan, not an incredible run blocker, but a solid one at that, but a really, really good receiver, really good after the catch. And I think Sean Payton has always liked the Jimmy Graham type, or the type of guy that he can deploy where he is different than the average player at that position. And I think Colston Loveland is the second best tight end in this draft behind Tyler Warren, but is a really good player to be picked at that spot. Next up, we have the Steelers. And this may be the easiest pick of the draft, and that's going to be Emeka Egbuka. I think the Packers are going to be a little upset that he did not fall this far to their spot. But Emeka Egbuka is someone who is really, really safe. He's a great route runner. He's pretty good after the catch. He played primarily the slot, which I think is a good pairing to have with George Pickens, who is primarily an outside guy. But you just need better wide receivers. I'm assuming in this scenario, they end up either re-signing Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. But there's just a lot of needs at that wide receiver position. And Emeka Egbuka might be the safest pick of the draft there, just because he's just a completely safe player. Good route runner and is really, really talented. I think he helps shore up that offense, who I'm not expecting to be incredible because they almost never are. But hopefully this creates a better scenario for them to take a quarterback either in next year's draft or in later rounds. But that brings me to number 22, which is the Chargers. The Chargers have a few needs here. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh is a guy who likes the trench players, and that's part of the reason why he took the tackle so early last season, and it ended up really working out, who was really, really good. But I think edge is going to be their biggest need here because Joey Bosa is a good player, but he's not really getting that much younger, and he's going to get expensive really, really soon. I think Mykel Williams is going to be a great pick here. I would not be surprised if they end up taking wide receiver. If they don't end up taking an edge rusher, because while Ladd McConkey is a really, really good player, I don't think he's destined to be your pure number one. I think it's fine if he's the best wide receiver on a team, but whenever he is leaps and bounds better than almost anyone else on that roster at the receiver position, it just creates a lot of problems that we saw in the playoffs, that whenever you are throwing to just Ladd McConkey, it's going to lead to some issues. But with all that being said, I think Mykel Williams is someone who has elite traits at that position, who was not super productive. I mean, Georgia is the type of team where they have a lot of guys who kind of rotate in and out, but it's someone who has elite traits. Mykel Williams, 6'5", which is giant. He's 265, which is also pretty heavy at that position. He was someone who was really good at the run defense spot. Someone who is still kind of learning as a pass rusher, but I think someone who I think the Chargers would be really happy to have on their team. Next up, we have the Packers. And me being a Vikings fan, I almost want to pick a bad player just because with the Packers, but they really need a receiver. And I think there is kind of a drop-off between the first tier of guys, your Tech McMillan, your Emeka Ibuka. I think Matthew Golden is still a really good player. I think they're going to want Matthew Golden. I think the biggest reason for that is because Matthew Golden is someone who you can trust potentially as a wide receiver one. And the Packers have kind of done this experiment where they've had a lot of wide receiver twos. They've had like 4 or 5 wide receiver twos who are pretty solid players you definitely want on your team, but not players that you want to be your wide receiver one. You need someone who can actually win in man coverage. And I trust Matthew Golden in doing that. Now, I think in a dream scenario, Emeka Ibuka falls a little bit further to the Packers at 23, but I'd be a little bit skeptical that the Steelers end up passing up on someone that talented at the 21 spot. But Matthew Golden, I think, is a pretty solid consolation prize. I think with the Vikings, this is a team that I'm obviously invested in. This is the team that I like the most. There's a big debate here between Derek Harmon and Shamar Stewart. And I say Shamar Stewart with the caveat that I'm assuming he ends up playing interior. Now, I know at the Combine, he did end up coming out a little bit lighter than expected, which was good for the people that wanted him to play edge rusher. But I think he can still really easily add that weight back. Shamar Stewart, I think, has a higher ceiling just because he has really, really good traits at the edge rusher /3 technique position. But I think it's difficult to argue with the production that we saw from Derek Harmon last year. Someone who was pretty solid at the run, but someone who was arguably the best pure pass rusher at the defensive tackle position. And when I say defensive tackle, I mean more 3 technique, but he had a 17.6% pass rush win rate, which is really, really important at that position. And it's something the Vikings have needed for a long time, is to have someone who they can trust to win in the interior. And Derek Harmon, I think, is the perfect guy to do that for them. Up next, we have the Texans. And I think this pick is pretty easy. Kelvin Banks is someone who can play tackle, who can play guard, but I think he's going to be best as a guard in this situation because the Texans have pretty good tackles, but their guards are atrocious. And that really led to some problems whenever they played in the playoffs last season. But I think Kelvin Banks is just the easiest pick here because whenever you have such a key weakness at guard, at center, and at the other guard position, it just makes it so easy for teams to exploit that. If you have one weakness at guard or one weakness at center, that's one thing. But when everyone is really bad, it's just not going to be a fun situation for CJ Stroud, who was pressured a lot this season. And, while they do have some injury concerns with their wide receivers, you still have Nico Collins, who is just like a pure alpha wide receiver one, someone who you can really trust there. Hopefully the Kelvin Banks selection will help improve that protection so that he can kind of get further upfield. Next up, we have the Rams. And this is also, in my opinion, a really easy pick. And that's going to be Armand Membu. Membu is someone who is a little bit short for a tackle. He's about 6'3", but he has really long arms. He's someone who played tackle, who played guard, and was really good at all of those positions. He also, in the Senior Bowl, had not a single bad rep. And so that just says a lot about his talent as a player. And he just almost never loses. And I think that's really important to have for the Rams. Whether or not they end up keeping Stafford, whether or not they end up moving on in the future, it's important to have someone who you can trust to protect your quarterback. And I think Armand Mimbu is going to be the easiest pick in that situation. Next up, we have the Ravens. And I think this is going to be an easy pick here. It's going to be Shamar Stewart. Shamar Stewart is someone who was not super productive in college. His pass rush win rate was around, I believe, 10%. I will double check that right now. 12.4%, which is solid, but you're really drafting him based on what he can be, not what he is now. And the Ravens kind of did that a few seasons ago with Odafe Oweh, someone who was just lightning fast. And Shamar Stewart is someone who is insanely strong. He's 6'6", 290. Really, really long. And I think in this situation, he's probably going to end up playing edge, maybe kind of kick inside for third down reps, guaranteed pass rush sets. But I think Shamar Stewart is one of the most talented players in this draft, and it just really screams Ravens for me here. Next up, we have the Lions. And the Lions don't have a ton of needs, but they do have some. Their center situation is a little bit up in the air. Their guards are solid, but definitely not amazing. I think I'm going to take Gray Zabel here. I think the reason you want Gray Zabel is because he is arguably the most versatile offensive lineman. And I say offensive lineman because he can play guard, he can play center, he can play tackle in this entire draft. And regardless of whatever weakness you have on the interior, he's someone who you can trust. And the Lions clearly really like beefing up the trenches, so they can either take an edge position or end up taking Gray Zabel, but he's someone that was electric in the Senior Bowl, did not lose like a single rep that I ended up seeing, but he's someone really, really talented. I would really like for the Lions to have him, but as a Vikings fan, I may not like that. Next up, we have the Commanders, and the Commanders here, the board didn't exactly break in their favor. The Commanders are in an interesting spot because they obviously have their receiver set, or their wide receiver one set. They have their quarterback fully set. They have a lot of cap space, but they also have a lot of needs because a lot of their key contributors last season were guys who they ended up picking up in free agency on short-term deals. So a lot of those contracts are expiring. So we kind of have to kind of wait and see before we really know what their key needs are going to be. But I think given that, you're always going to need edge rushers. And I think Nick Scorton, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think he is going to be the guy that you're going to want. He's someone who teams have really liked in the interview process, at least at the Senior Bowl. He's someone who is just a really, really talented piece, 6'4", 285. So he's definitely a heavier edge rusher, someone who may kick on the interior. But Texas A&M had a really good defensive line this year, and I think he was a big reason for that. Next up, we have the Bills. And to me, this is a pretty easy pick. The Bills have some needs at defensive interior. And so I'm going to take Darius Alexander. He was also one of those kind of Senior Bowl standouts, someone who was really good against the run, was solid against the pass, but still demonstrated the traits to be good against the run and the pass. 6'4", 310, so your typical kind of interior size, but definitely a strength for the Bills to end up taking that position. Next up, we have the Chiefs, and this to me is pretty easily Josh Connerly. I think the reason why is because the Chiefs, they saw point blank what happens whenever you have weak tackles, and you have to take your Pro Bowl guard and move him out to tackle, which is definitely not something you really want to do all the time. And, you played solid at that tackle position, but in the Super Bowl, things were just really, really rough. And Joe Thuney is someone who's a very talented guard, but is definitely much more of a guard than a tackle. And taking Josh Connerly, I think, would potentially shore up either of those tackle positions that they definitely have a weakness on here. Finally, we have the Eagles, and you can really take just about any position here because the Eagles are good everywhere. It says a lot about the Eagles and how good of a team they really are. After winning a Super Bowl, they have arguably the best roster next season as well. So really, in this case, I think the rich get richer. I think Donovan Izaraku is going to be the pick here. He's someone who was really good for Boston College, and he just screams Eagles to me because you don't have to play him right away. You have good edge guys, good defensive interior guys, but he's someone who in the future could develop, and I think he's going to be the perfect third edge rusher that the team ends up using on third downs and can kind of rotate in and out. So just to recap a little bit, I'm going to go over the picks that we ended up going about with this draft. First, we had Cam Ward. Second, we had Travis Hunter. Third, we had Shedeur Sanders. Fourth, Abdul Carter. Fifth, Mason Graham. Sixth, Tet McMillan. Seventh, Jahdae Barron. Eighth, Mike Green. 9, Luther Burden. 10, Ashton Genty. 11, Will Johnson, 12, James Pierce Jr., 13, Will Campbell, and 14, Tyler Warren, 15, Walter Nolan, 16, Josh Simmons, 17, Kenneth Grant, 18th, Jahad Campbell, 19th, Malachi Starks, 20th, Colston Loveland, 21, Emeka Ibuka, 22, Michael Williams, 23, Matthew Golden, 24, Derek Harmon, 25, Kelvin Banks, 26, Armand Membu, 27, Shamar Stewart, 28, Gray Zabel, 29, Nick Scarton, 30, Darius Alexander, 31, Josh Connerly, and 32, Donovan Izaraku. So let us know, what did you think? Do you agree with these draft selections? If your team ended up taking one of these players, would you be happy about it? Would you be upset? Your feedback is really appreciated, but this is Analytics with Asa, hosted on the FF Faceoff YouTube channel. Thank you for listening.